KKHT wants you to meet three of the classiest guys in real estate.
I am Chris Kelso, the maestro of mortgage.
I am Rob Cook, the godfather of real estate.
And I'm Joe Orsack, the king of credit swing. And together, we're
the Real Estate Rat Pack.
Much like us, real estate right now is smoking hot. So whether it's buying, selling, or owning, you need to check out the Real Estate Rat Pack.
They're here to take your calls and answer your questions live. Call now, 1-800-808-5548. And now, the Real Estate Rat Pack!
There it goes. Every week without fail.
Same thing.
Absolutely.
I love that the GOAT joins us now on a regular basis.
Yes, and he's got a pretty good voice, actually.
Yes.
He joins in,
Sounds like me singing in the shower in the morning.
Actually, I thought you were more like, yeah.
I wonder if anybody out there thinks that, because it's me and you howling, that the third person is Rob.
Yeah.
Yes, I would agree.
And here goes Rob.
I want to do a thank you, kind of a shout out to everyone. I had a 25th anniversary of my 39th birthday on Monday.
Yes.
And I had a great outpouring of well wishes and happy birthdays, and it made me feel good.
Absolutely.
It made me feel good, and thank you, Chris, for putting together that little group. We had a great time over there, one of our favorite places, the Union Kitchen over Memorial.
The Union Kitchen, that is
So
correct.
And
They took
after
very
the
good care of us.
fire department
them,
showed
right?
up and put out the candles, we had a good time.
That is correct.
Yeah, I actually have a story about that. I'll tell you later. So I served as a special commissioner on an eminent domain type of case, whereas the person who was being offered some money said, oh, that's not enough. So there's a process which you can go to, and I met this wonderful woman, which is the Honorable Judge Jacqueline Smith. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
And so the process, it was not like the process was how I thought it'd be, because we do arbitrations and things like that, so it was very similar, but it was very interesting how that and the person that the public was served. But before we get into that, I'd love to know, where you started, how you got here, and what you're doing now.
Well, I am a former judge. I'm now practicing law. I have my own law firm, Lucci Smith Law. And I resigned from the bench about 2.5 years ago to start my own practice.
You'll still be Judge Smith all the time. Always.
I know people still call you judge, but I just want to make everyone understand I wasn't actually the judge at that hearing that we met at. I was in the same capacity you were as a special commissioner.
You did a lot better job than I did, though.
I don't know about that.
She knew the intricacies of what to say.
She did, and actually, I was sitting in that seat of honor, and then when someone says, "Well, you get to be the lead person if you sit there," so I immediately moved over to the adjacent seat and allowed Jacqueline to sit there, and she did a marvelous job. Now, you're saying you actually started in the county.
Right. I practiced law for about 10 years, and a friend of mine had gone to work at the county attorney's office under Michael Fleming, and Mike Stafford was the first assistant back then, and she said, oh, it's so nice over here. Everyone's really nice. You should come join us. And so I applied in a very whirlwind-type interview process, which is very unusual for the government. I was hired as an assistant county attorney back in 1998. Paul Betancourt had just come on as tax assessor collector, and when he took over, there was an in-house counsel that they had that Carl had that advised him. And he's like, I don't need to pay a lawyer. I need accountants. So can I just use one of your lawyers? And so through a process, I got selected to be his liaison to the tax office, where I handled all the legal matters and worked directly with Paul on all the things that came up. And
that's a big job.
Yes. Especially with Paul, because he's
checkbook-
a big personality.
Yes,
He's
he
so
is.
much
Checkbook
fun.
knew Paul very well.
Yes, and it still knows that office, doesn't it? So you're in the working with tax, and all of a sudden you decide you're going to run for judge.
Well, actually,
or they said you need to do this.
Yeah, it was kind of a mixture of both, but I decided to run for judge. I had a few people putting the bug in my ear, and so I decided to go ahead and do it. And I talked to Paul about it before I did it, and he encouraged me. And so I ran and I won, and it was really a neat thing to do. I enjoy being a judge very much. The attorneys are great. I particularly like the county court at law bench because we had exclusive jurisdiction over the condemnation matters in Harris County. And there's only 4 of us. There are 4 county court at law judges. And I worked with some fabulous women. And at the time, Jack Cagle, now Commissioner Cagle, was judge of Court 1, and we were suite mates. And, of course, Roberta Lloyd and Judge Story and Judge Lloyd, we had worked together at the county attorney's office, so I knew them prior to taking the bench, and they are just awesome judges. I mean, they both are so diligent in everything they do. And I just had a great time. They were wonderful to me. And, you know, things happen and life changes. And
so your cases are exclusively having to do with condemnation? I
do. I dabble in a few other things that I know about. Like I said, I mean, I have a not just a condemnation background, but that's really my favorite. And that's where the primary focus of my practice is. And I also do some mediations and arbitrations.
Well, and I'd love to talk with you about that later, but I really am interested in the process. So, you know, the case that we sat on, it was somebody that was a landowner, and they were taking about 20 foot of his land, and he thought his land was worth X amount. I think he was asking for $50,000. I think we ultimately awarded him $20,000. But that happens every day, right? When someone says, "How does that process start with the county?"
Well, actually, a few years ago, they enacted what was called back then Senate Bill 18 to revise the property code. And now there's actually a very formal statutory process that happens for any entity that wants to take a piece of your property or all of your property for a public purpose or a public use. And in this case, they first start off with an introductory letter, which is the initial offer letter. And they give you 30 days to respond to that. And then they'll send you a final offer letter, and you get 15 days or 14 days to respond to that before they can file suit. With that final offer letter, they have to send an appraisal report. And so you get to see an independent appraiser's assessment of what the value is of the land they're taking. If you disagree with that, then you can, then you don't have to accept it. You do not have to take what they offer you. They file a petition. The judge of the court, like Judge Lloyd or Judge Story or Judge Mayfield or Judge Chang, will appoint 3 special commissioners. Now, commissioners are not judges. They are not lawyers necessarily. They are 3 disinterested fee holders that own property in the county in which the property is located. So if it's in Harris County, you have to own property in Harris County to sit as a special commissioner. Those 3 people, just like it would be a juror, you know, just who you might see on a jury panel, you know, just any background, whether it's appraisal, accounting, real estate, law, you know, radio, whatever it is.
Any background. That's why Rob was able to do it.
A plumber.
There's no limitation on the background.
You know, you don't
know.
have
everything is at
You
mortgage
barely got
people.
in there.
Anyway, so those 3 people, they are called special commissioners, and you go to a hearing, and it's kind of like a mini court. It's an administrative process, and you get to tell your side of the story. The rules of evidence don't apply. The rules of procedure don't apply. It's very informal. There's not a judge. There's not objections where you're, you know, banging the gavel and whatnot. But the attorneys, if you have an attorney, can show up and present your case. Those 3 judges that are special commissioners then decide the value of what they think based on what you say and based on what the condemning authority thinks, and they assess the value.
One question I've got, you know, one of the things, is there any way, for example, let's say I've got my home and they come in, they want to condemn my home or they want to take it for eminent domain. Is there any way to say never sell your home if you wanted to? Or is it pretty much a process that no matter what's going to happen, you got to come to the realization that you're going to have to give it up for that public work?
Well, you know, long ago, the opinion was everybody holds their property subject to the power of eminent domain because, you know, think about it. If that property owner that had the property in the middle of 59 decided they weren't going to sell and the state had to work around, we might have some pretty squiggly roads. I mean, that makes sense to a certain degree that they have to be able to decide where and what goes. But there's also a process, and there's also law that says, but it should be given with deference to the landowner, with due consideration, with an honest and fair assessment. And so if they come across a piece of property, for example, that they didn't realize until they got out there was a rock quarry or something that would be really hard to convert to what it was they wanted to do, they may go around it. An example of that is on I-10. Remember when they expanded I-10 not too long ago?
I remember
There's
that.
a cemetery along I-10. Well, they didn't want to move the bodies in the cemetery.
I do remember that, yes.
And so half of I-10 was expanded to the north, and then along where the cemetery is, they actually expanded to the south to avoid the cemetery. So you can talk with them and ask them to consider. Ultimately, their decisions are given a lot of deference by the courts because they do have to have some control over that.
When you're looking at putting a freeway in, there's, you know, it becomes a lot more obvious that this is something that, you know, is a big project, that type of thing. What keeps the government from saying, you know what, I like your little proper piece of land, and I want to come in and take that, and I'll come up with some good excuse for what I want to use it for.
And that was what I was battling in court on Friday.
So, what's your response to that,
So,
Judge?
my response to that is it has to be a public necessity in order for them to condemn, and they have to declare it a public necessity, and then they also it has to be for public use. And there is a lot of case law. In fact, there's a water authority case where there was a water authority that had the ability to condemn for flooding and whatnot and expand the banks. And property owner owned some acreage along that, but they also owned some on the bluff. Well, on the bluff really wasn't a flooding issue, but they wanted to use that for campsites and parks. And the park authority at the time didn't have condemnation authority. So they tried to condemn that bluff property as well as part of the flooding, and then the court said, no, that's not what you're giving eminent domain authority for. You're only giving it for flood control and the waters, and that's not part of it. So no, you can't have that half of the property.
So the court then becomes for lack of better words, the public advocate in that situation?
Well, it's not
I mean,
the
how does
public
that work?
advocate, but they are the gatekeeper, so to speak. They make sure that the role of the judge, as in any case, is to the judiciary oversees and make sure that the laws are complied with, and they follow the statutes and they follow the law. They don't make the law. So as a disinterested, in other words, I'm not vested as a judge. You're not vested with the interest of I want landowners to win or I want condemning authorities to win. You have to look at what the law says and what the legislature has decided is appropriate, and then you apply the law to the facts in that situation.
Yeah, and we actually did a constitutional amendment. In fact, our TREAP Act, which is our political action committee for the realtors, actually was a big force behind making sure we had an amendment so things could be taken only for public use. And because there was a case, what was that case?
The Kelo case out of the United States Supreme Court, where the city wanted to have some development done along, it's not really a port, but they had like
a waterway of something.
Yeah, waterway of some kind. And they wanted to go ahead and put restaurants and revitalize the area. And they had a vested interest in that. And it was a very
tax
old
base.
Well, sure, but look at downtown and the revitalization and all the business and everything that it brings to the city. And so that was their purpose, was to revitalize their area. Well, there was a landowner that had lived there all her life, and she had property that overlooked the waterway, and she didn't want to give it up to have a restaurant built on it or a hotel or something along those lines. And that was the big fight. And the Constitution didn't limit the public purpose to only flood control or roadways, and they said increasing your tax base and improving your, revitalizing the area, that's a public interest. And so the United States Supreme Court came down on the side of the city in that case and allowed them to go ahead and condemn.
Wow.
Yeah, and they have a lot of authority.
They have a lot of authority.
So if the person doesn't want to voluntarily sell their property, how do they end up getting paid in the process if they, in that case, they are ruled against?
Well,
I think we're coming up again like 2 minutes.
Yeah, 2 minutes, right?
To break here.
After the special commissioner's hearing, like the one that I did with Rob not too long ago, if either party doesn't like what the commissioners assessed the value at, decided the value was, they can file objections. At that point, it becomes just a regular civil case. It's no longer in the administrative phase. And then you can go argue about the value and the right to take in the courts, and it becomes litigation.
And I'm gonna ask it now, but we're gonna get it sort of answered when we come back.
We do have more time.
Yeah, because we have plenty of time. But one of the things I'm interested in is, one of the things we tell from a real estate perspective, we tell everybody real estate is a great investment. You can buy and hold. It outperforms anything associated with the stock market, right? And there's a history of that. I mean, there's a long history. So my concern would be, let's say I bought a piece of land, and my goal is to hold it and pass it down generation to generation, and supposedly it's going to be able to appreciate over that period of time. If I get an eminent domain case against me all of a sudden to say, we want to take this away, I want to talk a little bit about how value can be established to know what I'm losing out on if I was to keep that property over a period of time.
I think they can only give you current value. I don't think they can give you
exactly.
projected value.
So that would be sort of my argument. But you know what happens when you're having fun?
Time flies.
Time flies, and guess what? A break
or the
comes
police
right
get
upon
involved.
us. That is correct. So you know what? We are having a great time here talking about eminent domain and condemnation. However, we're taking a break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the Real Estate Rat Pack Radio Show with Chris, Joe, and Rob. The crew is taking your calls, so dial in at 1-800-808-5548.
And
We're back with Chris, Joe, and Rob.
You know what's funny is my daughter knows how to repeat the
whole phrase?
the intro perfectly well. She's like, and now,
That's-
if you have any questions?
And now here's my dad. Wow. Well, I am happy to have invited this gentleman along. I've known Frank for probably at least a decade, maybe longer, and he served with me on the MLS advisory group. I learned more about appraisals from this gentleman than probably anybody out there, and I'm still learning. And it's Frank Lucco. Welcome to the show, Frank.
Oh, thank you very much.
And, Frank was telling me some things the other day, and I'm starting to hearing about all these other people who have authority to do eminent domain. Talk about a little bit about how you got into the appraisal side of the world.
By accident, back in the late 70s, I was working on a marine biology degree, and I always liked real estate. I saw the late night shows, Hawaiian shirts, big yachts,
No money
making
down.
and was interested in it. And my boss hired me. He was looking for a residential appraiser. And back then, all you needed was a camera, a clipboard, and a car. And you could get in it if you had a salesman's license or a broker's license. So that's how I stumbled into the business. I never even couldn't spell the word appraisal when I started.
You can now, though, right?
Barely.
Okay.
He was going to appraise marine biology and shifted it to land.
So, when I was talking to you, we were actually with our dear friend Shad Bogany. We're talking about that, and then we started talking about that I had done this special commissioner with the good judge here, and you said, "Well, I've done a lot of that stuff." And I said, "There's a show, because that's a process that not many people know about, and of course, you come into those situations to kind of prove up values. So the values when we worked on ours the other day was." They were doing a lot of comparisons of, they were taking a strip of land, but they were comparing, the one side was comparing it to very expensive commercial properties, and of course the county side was comparing it to residential properties, and neither side was getting it right. Let's talk about how you can extrapolate values. And by the way, I rented that word for the day. I have to have it back tomorrow.
Yes.
Okay, gotcha, okay.
That's one of those short-term rentals.
There you go. Values, I guess I'd start off with saying there is no 1-800 value of a property. The reason I have a job is real estate is somewhat complicated and somewhat complex. There are multiple ways to go about establishing value, but for the most part, we think of three traditional ways, which is the sales comparison approach, the cost approach, and the income approach. Sales comparison approach is most understandable to the layperson. That would be as you would go out and look and try and buy a house for sale, you would look at other houses that are currently for sale and maybe other houses that have also sold. And from those, in your mind, you would say, that one's a little better, that one's not quite as good, that one's almost the same, so it's got to be around $350,000.
Yeah, and you also use laws of substitution, too.
Most definitely. So the appraiser approaches it from that approach. Another approach, which is a little more complicated, is called the cost approach, and that's where the appraiser estimates the underlying site value, reproduction cost new of improvements, takes away depreciation, and adds in site improvements, and that generates a number. And the third approach, which is probably the most complicated approach, is the income approach, and that's where you're estimating a future anticipated income stream. On a residential property, it's usually done with a gross rent multiplier. On a commercial property, it may be a discounted cash flow or some type of other analysis, but you're looking at the expenses, you're looking at the income, and you're gauging on what others might pay for that kind of investment.
And in that process, I remember I used to do commercial development. I actually had an appraisal that actually was a full narrative appraisal and used all three of them to come up with the final values in all three methods and applied it. And I guess they took averages or something like that and applied it to that. And that's what I took to the bank.
Yes,
Things
most
like that.
definitely. And they'll usually not so much an average, but definitely they'll weigh one approach and weigh the data and say, hey, based on this type of property and the kind of evidence that I have, this approach makes the most sense. And at the end of the day, I'm leading toward this value range.
But again, when you're taking a strip of land, that's one thing. But I know in some cases, sometimes a building has to be raised to make room for a road or thing like that. And several buildings left when I-10 was being done.
Oh, yeah.
And so the landlord's going, well, this building's worth this, and I've got this much income coming. They're going to lose all that projected future income. How can you compensate them for that?
There's a couple ways to do it. As you might guess, this line of appraisal work isn't really much different than property tax protests. If I go out to appraise individual's home, for instance, and I show up on a day where they're trying to get a 3.5% mortgage interest rate because they're refinancing, their house is the Taj Mahal.
And of course, call Chris Kelso if you're going to do that.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with this wonderful establishment they're living in. On the other hand, the very next day, if I go out to see that house and they're trying to protest their taxes, it's a dump. And they'll point out everything that's wrong with it. So in their own mind, there can be a $300,000 shift in what the property value could be worth,
depending on what they're up to at the moment.
On their purpose.
Every year I have clients call me and says, "Oh man, they just went up on my tax appraisal again," and I goes, "Well, what they appraised it for?" And they'd say, and I said, "Would you sell it for that?" "Oh no, that's too low." I go, "Well, that's probably right then."
That's exactly right. So that human beings being what they are, the job of the appraiser is to try and interject some objectivity to the process. And so theoretically, the landowner appraiser and the county appraiser, in an ideal world, they would come in at the same number. But even if they weren't on opposite sides, under any kind of circumstances, it's not easy to come in at the same number. I can send 10 appraisers from my own office out to appraise the same property, and they're not going to come in at the same number. There's a lot that goes into it. It is a blend of an art and a science.
So if you're the landowner in the situation that's dealing with, I just went brain dead when I would say the word, eminent domain issues. I still had imminent in my head.
Not be confused with imminent.
Yes. If you are imminently facing an eminent domain situation, what's the criteria for hiring or going about working with an appraiser?
A couple things. Again, depending on the type of property, if it's residential, you're going to want somebody who has residential experience. If it's commercial, you're going to want to know some about commercial experience. And then a lot of these properties have a business tangent to them. So there's something that needs to be calculated as far as the business value, what we call a going concern. And an example for that, which reminded me of the first break, if we were talking about the Katy Freeway, if you look at the Katy Freeway and Beltway, a classic case there's a multi-level hotel there that won $6 million because they wrapped the Beltway around it, and they were able to argue this is how much it's hurting our income stream. So in that case, you are taking the income stream in consideration, but as the judge indicated, it's not the income stream for the next 50 years that you might own it. Everything is brought down to the current date of value. So if you no longer own this property, what's it worth to you today? And not necessarily to you, what is it worth to the market today? And if you're doing income-producing property, then you are discounting a future income stream, and you would use that to calculate the value of the property.
Because I would have no idea what questions to ask in assessing a appraiser for the job, other than how much do you hate the government? So.
Well, I think the appropriate questions would be, are you familiar with the eminent domain process? Do you have experience in this? Do you have geographic competency? How long have you been into business? Have you worked in these other kind of cases? And a good question is, have you worked on both sides? Sometime for the property owner and sometime for the condemning organization, because you are looking for somebody that's believable, objective, and can be fair about the process.
And support your opinion. That's what you want, right?
Yes.
Well, you would like that, but the appraiser is bound by uniform standards of professional practice. They got a code of ethics and standards, so everybody has their own idea what a good appraisal is, but if the homeowner would like $500,000 and the appraiser can only come up to $300,000,
it must be the appraiser's fault. It's
the appraiser's responsibility to tell the homeowner, take the $310 they're offering you. I only see $300.
And if a landowner hires you, you come in with an appraisal. Do they have any opportunity to say, hey, that sounds crazy to me. That it seems way off. Can they get a second opinion? In essence.
Oh, most definitely. We do a lot of work for FEMA, one of our biggest clients. They do both voluntary and involuntary buyouts, and they'll order appraisals, and the homeowner or property owner gets a chance to order appraisals. A lot of times when you're thinking about this, if you've been presented the letter and you know what the other side is going to offer you, you can hire an appraiser and say, hey, look, I'm interested in preliminary. Take a look at this. Am I in the ballpark? And if it is, I'm not going to spend any money. I'll sign on a dotted line and move on.
That brings up an interesting question when you talk about FEMA, and they're condemning it because it's now considered, not, you can't live in this thing because it's in a floodway, flood zone. I think along the San Jacinto River, they've had gone back and forth with some properties on that area. What is your value of your property at that point if you know that they're not going to allow any more residents to be there? Doesn't it really diminish the value of the property?
Well, here's how it typically works. In these cases, the appraiser is it would be similar for pipelines. It's similar for freeways. It's similar for these flood-related issues. We were awarded Galveston County and the city of Galveston. We did all those houses up along the coast after Hurricane Ike, and we also did all those ones back in '98 that were on the river, Trinity River. We did thousands of properties on the Trinity River, and the interview process to the property owners is very fascinating because I had individuals on the Trinity River that had flooded houses, their own house out 19 times in the last 22 years. They were literally making a living off money from the government. So that's when the government came out.
People
and said,
do that?
3 strikes and you're
Do
out.
we have a program that allows that to happen?
What?
And so when I interview, a reasonable question to a property owner is not, was your house in good condition? You know what kind of answer you're going to get.
The sarcasm of the hosts and or guests may not be the views of the station.
So what you have to be objectively, you have to go about it a little more scientifically. When did you replace your AC? When did you replace your roof?
Which time, right?
Roof plumbing. And so when they're pulling out the avocado appliances and the gold shag carpet, and they say they just put it in last year, you got to question, where did they get it from?
Absolutely. So which store still sells that, by the way?
Exactly.
We are coming up against a break and
Gotta pay
we're
for the
having
show.
great subject matter. We're going to continue on, but we have to take a break, so stay tuned to the next segment. We'll be right back.
I love...
I live in a tiny closet, a lukewarm cold water flat, with room for a couple of cinders and a mouse, a hole, and a trap.
Have you been in credit prison so long that you forgot what freedom feels like? Break free with Improve My Credit USA. No longer do you need to feel embarrassed, trapped, and like you have no options. Improve My Credit USA, the consumer-voted #1 company in America, can help you navigate the challenging path to credit freedom, lower your interest rates, or finally qualify for that new home. Break free today and call Improve My Credit USA, 281-914-4116.
Does it matter who does your real estate inspections? You bet it does. You want someone knowledgeable and experienced, someone you can rely on and trust. You want A.B. Bowles Home Inspections. Owned by Ashley Bowles, A.B. Bowles Home Inspections makes client satisfaction a priority. You'll get detailed, easy-to-read reports. Plus, they'll take the time to explain the report to you before and after the inspection. If you're investing in real estate for your family or as a business, call A.B. Bowles Home Inspections at 832-306-3723. That's 832-306-3723.
Welcome back to the Real Estate Rat Pack Radio Show with Chris, Joe, and Rob. The crew is taking your calls, so dial in at 1-800-808-5548.
And we're back.
You're having too much fun over there.
We are having a lot of fun. Well, I'm here next to the judge.
Go scream!
And Miss Smith, actually. And one of the things I wanted to get back to a question I had at the other segment we talked about right there we were talking about obviously being able to go through and evaluate from an appraisal perspective, but we also talked about a little bit, about let's say you have a business and that business actually has income coming in. Let's say it's
like a restaurant,
like a restaurant or a hotel,
Parking lot.
And so parking lot, as Joe was saying,
garage.
and then you end up having. Then you end up wanting to get it. Eminent domain comes in, they want to take it away, and you've got future earnings that are now impacted. How was all that considered in this process?
Well, frankly, it's considered in the same way it would if you wanted to sell the building. That's the approach that should be taken. So if you wanted to sell your building, you're not going to sell it to somebody who's going to pay you in advance for 50 years worth of income, right? Because then they're paying you in advance, and they're not going to make any money because they've given you all their income for the next 50 years. So you actually have to value it based on the income stream, based on a capitalization rate, based on the net present value of that money, and based on a history of what is actually performing, what that property is actually producing.
But I don't want to sell.
Being that devil's advocate, I don't want to sell, though. You see, so I understand on the one side you say, if I was a willing seller, I would have to approach the market with the normal way of selling my property, right? But if I'm an unwilling seller, somebody who had, I've built this business, I've got a revenue stream, et cetera, and I'm an unwilling seller, I think that changes things a bit, though. That's my side of things.
Well, that's your side of things, but it's not the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't say that's okay.
I understand you feel that way.
Here comes the judge.
But we don't care.
The Constitution requires the condemning authority to pay the market value of property. Market value is defined as the value that a willing buyer would pay to a willing seller on that given day.
But neither being under duress, and this is certainly under duress.
That is correct.
And that's why you don't consider the duress, because market value doesn't consider the duress. And the Constitution says that you're entitled to market value for your property taken as a result of condemnation.
But you're taking away one of the big things, duress.
Yeah, there you go.
So, with my obvious, like of the government in general, if I got that letter and I'm dealing with this situation, I'm saying, man, I want to fight this with everything I've got. I want to get the most value out of it because I'm with Chris. I'm going, I built a business here or whatever else. I've got income stream coming in, and I have zero desire to sell. How do I go about, hiring the best attorney to,
What a segue. One of our common recurring themes is always get a professional.
Right. Work with a professional. So what questions am I asking to make sure I am getting the absolute best attorney in this process to make sure I get the best deal for myself in this process?
Well, there's three things I think you should look at when you're talking to attorneys. Number one, do you get along with them? Because you're going to be in litigation with them, which is a stressful situation, and your personalities have to blend. And, as an attorney and a 20-year plus attorney, I have the luxury of getting to pick my clients a little bit. So I get to pick who I like to work with. I don't take on clients that are going to drive me nuts and make it a difficult situation.
In other words,
you're
you're out. Good. You are.
That's it. I am out. She's like, I am not representing Kelso.
But you should do the same thing. You should find a lawyer that when you interview them, that you have a rapport and a trust in them so that you will listen to their advice. That's number one. Number two, you want somebody that works in this area. This is a complicated area of law. It's not rocket science necessarily. I mean, I couldn't build the ship to the moon, but it is still a very intricate area of law, and not everybody can do it. Not everybody has the experience and knows what to look for to do it. So you really want somebody that has been in the business. And then the third thing you need to do is make sure that they have a history or some confidence with the process or the project that's going on, because that's always helpful too. If they're aware of the area, they're aware of the project or the type of condemnation. For example, the difference might be somebody might be really good at pipelines, but they haven't done roadways, or vice versa. And so there are a lot of them out there, a lot of attorneys out there that specialize in condemnation, and they've done it all. But there's also a handful that really focus their condemnation experience in a very technical area.
Interesting.
I'm going to ask Frank the same question, is basically what would you look for with an appraiser? And I think if you're going to go protest something, you certainly should get an appraiser involved, because you're the one that's going to set up valuation on that person's behalf. What should they look for from you?
Again, geographic competency is a real factor. Experience, as the judge said, with the particular type of property, with the particular type of condemnation that's going on. Years in business, I think, definitely help. They've been around the block. And I think it's also very positive if they've had an opportunity to work on both sides, both for the condemning organization and for the property owner.
I would also add with appraisers, condemnation law is all about the experts, and your appraiser is your expert. So you need to make sure your appraiser has the ability to communicate your position to that jury. So testifying experience and their ability to really work with people and get and explain it to people who aren't appraisers, because they're the ones making the decision. The lawyer controls the courtroom, but the appraiser controls the testimony because it's coming out of his mouth, and it is a battle of the experts.
Amen. I've learned that firsthand because we've had the opportunity over the last 5 years to work on the biggest, the third biggest, and the fourth biggest litigation case in the United States, and these all came out of the subprime mortgage meltdown. All those 20
there was a meltdown?
What? What are we talking about? What
vaguely remember a mortgage meltdown, but those cases that came out of Wall Street with all the tranches and all the properties, we were on those cases, and it's exactly like Judge Smith says. It is a battle of experts and communication and being able to boil it down into layperson's terms, even though it's complicated, is a real plus.
Well, let me ask you.
I just got a text from Bill Napick, and he's a host of a radio show later on, actually on Real Estate Matters. That's Real Estate Matters at 1:00 on this radio station. And he wrote me just now, and he said, "What would the judge do if she were in that position?"
Oh my!
Of being condemned?
Absolutely.
I would immediately
hire myself.
Yeah, I would. I probably would. I know I get along with me.
Most days.
But I would look at. I'd call my appraisers that I know I have a lot of confidence in, and I'd ask their opinion. Is this a fair offer? Because I don't want to spend the money on hiring experts and everything else if they really are making me a reasonable offer. If they're not, and I want to challenge it, I'm going to challenge it every step of the way.
If here's because I really know very little about the subject, so it works well because I can just ask lots of questions. Kelsey and I own a business, and
Collins today. We've got all our questions right here.
Right. Kelso and I own this business that we were talking about earlier, and we don't want to sell. We're happy with it. We got income coming in, and now we get this issue that the government wants to buy our property, but we want to fight it. Am I going to face if I make the government condemn the property? Do I face any fines or penalties in that process? Is there any pain for going that far with it?
You might have late night visitors.
No.
The county appraiser sent us over here.
The worst that can happen is if you really do lose, you could be assessed costs. You could be assessed the cost as opposed to the condemning authority. If you challenge it and you get less, and you've taken the money out of the registry of the court, you have to pay it back. Because one of the things, in order for them to take possession of the property, whatever the special commissioner's award is the value, they have to put that into the court's registry. If you're challenging the right to take, you cannot take that money out because as soon as you do, you've forfeited challenging the right to take. But you can always challenge the value. So, and you have the right to that money because that's what they've decided your property's worth. So if you take it out, and there was a case where the special commissioners gave a lot of money and then the jury took it back and the landowner actually had to return it because he had taken the money out.
Oh, dang.
And so that's some of the things that might happen.
Man, that would suck, right? Got all this money, gotta give it back. Oops, they made a mistake.
So for both of you, it's I get my property condemned, but you know what? I want to net out as much money as I can. I really don't want to hire anybody. I want to do it myself. Well,
it's that look she just gave you. I wish the audience could see that.
I wish this was TV.
That was you're an idiot look if I ever saw it. You chain
yourself to the building and you're going to fight City Hall, and the reality is you probably cannot get through this process without some expert help.
Well, let's just say that people don't specialize in the area because it doesn't take experience to do it. I mean, every case is unique. It does take your ability to understand the differences and the nuances. It also, it makes a difference. And what's unique to your property to you might not be necessarily what makes it unique to an appraiser or a jury or in the condemnation context.
Now, the majority, and both of you can answer this also, is that the majority of cases probably they get an offer, they look at it, and it gets accepted. I think that would probably, most often, that's what occurs. Is that right?
A lot of times that happens.
And so if somebody objects to it, what's usually the time involved with going through an objection? Like the case we heard, how long was that in process?
I don't know how long it was in process, but The very first thing that happens is before the case starts, and that's the bona fide offer period that starts with the initial letter. They have to wait 30 days after they send the initial offer letter to send a final offer letter, and then they have to wait 14 days before they can file suit. And so that minimum is a 45-day process from the initial offer letter to the filing of the petition. Once that statement in condemnation or petition in condemnation is filed, the judge has to appoint the special commissioners, and it goes through the administrative phase. That also has time deadlines. You're looking at, best case scenario, I think, realistically, from the initial offer letter to the special commissioners hearing, even if everything worked like clockwork, I don't see how you could possibly get that done in less than 90 days.
And here's a hypothetical situation. You condemn a piece of land or a property of some type. They had a use for it, and then maybe the government didn't get the full funding for that use, and that property is now owned by the county or the city or whomever was the condemning authority. What can happen to that property at that point?
You can buy it back.
I give you $1, right? And all other good consideration, right?
Well, and unfortunately, that does happen from time to time, and there are provisions for it if they don't actually use it. But for the most part,
I guess the question is, could they sell it for private use at that point?
After so much time, yes, they can.
So with enough strategy in place, they actually could condemn land, not actually develop what they said they're going to do it for, and later on put it into commercial use.
They would have to hold it for quite a while, but yes, they can.
Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and that's a good question. Is there a holding pattern? Would they? You mentioned they have to hold it for a little while. Don't know it. Don't know if that's something, but is that like a 10-year or 20-year? Is there regulation around something like that or code around something like that?
There is, and I would, frankly, guys, I
wants
think
her
I need
property
my
code
property code.
Where's that clerk when you need her?
And frankly, I just haven't dealt with this recently, and so I'm going off of memory. But as I recall, there is a holding period that they hold it for, and I'm not sure exactly what it is. I want to say it's 10 years, but I don't know that off the top of my head. But I know exactly where to find it in the property code.
Well, it's one of those things is we don't want to ever get too technical on you because we obviously know there's a lot of code out there to read, and we don't necessarily want to go through and read some of that code. But it's interesting stuff, that we've got out there. One of the things that we're going to be doing, we are coming up against a break again. We've got Bruce actually who has a question. He's ask the question right when we come back after the break. But if you do have a question, you can call in. You can reach us at 800-808-5548. You can text us as well, all those individuals out there who know how to reach us on the Real Estate Rat Pack Facebook website or on our website as well. You can do so. And time flies when you're having fun. We have one more segment. Good questions. Great guest, by the way, about eminent domain. So,
Bruce, hang on the line.
Bruce, stay there. We'll be right back with you. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Protect your number one valued asset, your home. Want to know who home builders, commercial property, and real estate professionals call when they have a foundation issue? PermaPure Foundation Repair of Texas. You can access the same professional-grade services the pros choose, all backed by a lifetime transferable warranty and over 15,000 successfully completed projects. Visit PermaPure.com. That's PermaPure.com to schedule your free evaluation today.
Berkshire Hathaway Home Services Anderson Properties, the fastest growing real estate company in Houston. Over 400 trained professional realtors here to serve your needs in 21 locations in Houston and across the state. Whether you're buying, selling, or leasing, Berkshire Hathaway Home Services Anderson Properties is the smart choice. Check us out at AndersonProps.com today. Find out why so many choose Berkshire Hathaway Home Services Anderson Properties for all of their real estate needs. You know us, we know real estate.
I am Chris Kelso, the maestro of mortgage.
And I am Rob Cook, the godfather of real estate.
And I'm Joe Orsack, the king of credit swing. And together, we're
the Real Estate Rat Pack.
When the jet is landing and we're coming home from a long trip to Vegas, the only car the Rat Pack wants to see on the tarmac is a beautiful stretch limo from Dimensions by Dan. Their cars are really gorgeous, but it's the over-the-top customer service that the Rat Pack really loves. So no matter what your occasion, give them a call at 281-590-1101. Ask them about the Rat Pack special, and Dan's really going to take good care of you. That's 281-590-1101, Dimensions by Dan.
Welcome back to the Real Estate Rat Pack Radio Show with Chris, Joe, and Rob. The crew is taking your calls, so dial in at 1-800-808-5548.
And we're back. Having a great time. You know, we have a caller that we told him that we were going to grab him very first thing. Bruce, how are you doing?
Doing fine, thank you. My question really goes towards the tiers or the tax increment reinvestment zones. Who has the authority under the tiers to condemn property for them? What rights do I have, and when can they come on the property to do a survey?
Good question. So did you hear that one all right?
I did. Well, as far as getting on your property to do a survey, typically when they send out that initial offer letter, they also send out with it a survey form where you're giving them permission to be on the property. If you don't grant them permission to be on the property, they can go to court and get an injunction, enjoining you from interfering with their ability to survey, because that's part of their rights to condemn. So you can make it difficult for them, but they're going to get on your property to survey. So as far as that goes, that has to happen with like the initial offer letter or the introductory letter, not even the initial offer letter, when they're first starting to figure out what they're going to offer you, et cetera. They usually send out a letter saying, we're in the area, we're thinking about doing this, we're going to be on your property. And that's a courtesy to let you know they're going to be there. The tax reinvestment zones, tax increment reinvestment zones, frankly, they had a lot of power for a while, and I don't think that they had quite as much power as they used to.
St. George Place is one of those examples.
Right. And people are challenging their ability to take on a regular basis, and so it really has to do with how they go about the process of deciding what properties to take and what to do with it.
Did that answer your question?
I think it kind of hit it on the head. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have another call coming in.
We do have another call right behind there. We've got Vicky calling in. Vicky, how you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great today.
Oh, perfect. You have a question or a shout-out you want to do?
I want to do a shout-out to Ray at Styles Unit. Tell him that I got his letter, and praise God that he's listening to your program.
Well, thank you very much, Vicky. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. You know, time flies, like I said, and we're in the last segment with a lot of good questions that we've got right there. And, you know,
we lost Ashley. She's busting up.
Yeah,
over
we
here.
lost.
We can get her to,
lost Ashley right there.
We've had a good day.
I have another question for you.
Yes.
I keep rolling with this. We have to buy a business now, Kel Social, because I've
just to be able to argue the point.
Yeah, just be able to argue the point. Exactly. We need to put it near a freeway or something. If we had this business and that Kelsey and I were talking about, and now we get the letter, and now the government comes back and says, well, fine, we don't want to mess with your property. We're just going to go ahead and build a parking lot around it, or freeway around it, whatever. And now our business is actually messed up because of what they did. What do we do? We're sitting here twiddling our thumbs. We got no more customers because we got freeways running around our business.
That happens all the time. In fact, I have funny real estate photos in my office where you'll see 80-story buildings all around a little 1,100 square foot house. That's the one person that didn't want to sell out.
The Omni on Woodway.
There you go.
The Omni on Woodway?
There was a little old lady in the middle of all the land with Riverway and all the office buildings, and she didn't want to sell out, and she's got her little house in the middle of
that
town.
wasn't through eminent domain, though. That was done. That was all
It
through
was
private purchases and things like that. So.
Same kind of concept.
But,
but she's making out well when she wants to sell that piece of property.
Right?
Yeah, no kidding.
What's the recourse then if our business has actually been hurt by it?
We told you to sell.
Yeah. A couple years goes by, and now y'all we have this freeway running around our little business here, and customers no longer want to stop in, and now our business has been damaged by what they did.
And that is called an inverse condemnation claim, and that is when the government does not actually go through the statutory process, but they have taken property or property rights from you for which they owe you just compensation. Now, not everything is compensable, and you have to look at the property rights that they took, and there are requirements for inverse condemnation, but those are very interesting cases, and I'm handling one right now, actually two, but they are based on the fact that the government took your property without telling you they were taking your property, and you're like, well, well, you can't do that. What are you doing? I mean, that's my property. And you go file a suit against them and say, you took my property without following all the right procedures, and now you owe me money.
And that actually happens still.
It does actually happen.
Now, have you ever been involved with an inverse condemnation, Frank?
Yes, I have.
And so how do you come up with the value on that? Is it just of income stream loss, or, I guess you're right, to use the property the way you wanted to use it? I mean, there's got to be some sort of valuation you got to be able to put to that.
Yeah, in all cases, what we're really appraising is property rights. We talk about real estate, but we're appraising property rights. And as we talked about earlier, when you're looking at an appraisal for something like this, you're instructed not to value it assuming the project goes in. For instance, if there's going to be some fabulous city structure that property values you think might go from $5 a foot to $30 a foot, the appraiser cannot appraise it at $30 a foot. They don't take into account the 10-year project that's going to take place. But for the same standard, they also don't take into account that if you're now backing up to a freeway, you're not damaged. They give you the value assuming that the project is not taken into consideration.
I just thought about something that I'm curious about how this plays out. Years ago, I managed a Radio Shack, and it was out on 290, and I took over the location, and shortly after, they decided to put 290 under construction there and expand the freeway. And basically, I mean, you had to go like a mile out of your way to be able to get into the parking lot. So no one ever wanted to come shopping there. They went like 3 miles away to the other store where they could get into the location easy and didn't want to mess with it. And invariably, Radio Shack ended up shutting that location down because the business just evaporated. Is there not any kind of a recourse there? Or is there any, if the business came in and said, look, because of you had eminent domain over here and you took property and did all that stuff and all that was normal and right, but because you hindered or hampered business so much over here that there's some recourse for the business owner?
Well, if that property was along the part that was taken, that would be called a material and substantial impairment of access. It used to be that you had to show both material and substantial, and it was very difficult, and security of travel was not compensable, other than as to the enhanced value, other than as a part of the property value itself. The rule changed with Senate Bill 18. They called that the Landowner Bill of Rights, and also the Appraiser's Retirement Bill, because now everybody gets an appraiser right with their final offer. But what happens is that now they've decided that no, that's too high of a standard, and material impairment of access is compensable. And so you would actually you would include that as part of the damage model when you're valuing that property, that there is a good chance that that business may go out of business, and that impairment of access did diminish the value and the marketability of that property.
Interesting. That's really fascinating. Because there was actually a number of businesses that were in that strip center that went out of business after they went under construction.
And wasn't there a lot of cases that took place actually over there in the Town and Country area whenever Beltway 8 went in? It really, before obviously we see Center and the new place in Town and Country, you had Town and Country Mall, you had the big movie theaters there, you had the old hotel there, and once they put in Beltway 8, I mean, it impacted those businesses there for a long time. Nowadays, it's a different market. Accessibility has really changed, but that time, that's an example of that mall went from being the mall in Houston to being a ghost land. I mean, almost overnight.
By trends, the mall trends are that way across the country, regardless.
But we're talking about way before that trending took place, though. We're talking about, you got to realize Town and Country Mall. We were visiting that thing way back in the 80s.
I can tell you that it had been struggling all through the 90s.
Yeah.
So it had already economically was an unfeasible project. That's why they put HCC in there and things.
I still like that 3-story mall.
Well, I understand you do it, but you know what? Malls have gone the way of the dodo bird. So.
Yes, I agree.
But so then you have to kind of figure out what part is diminished value caused by the condemnation and what part is market trends. And so you got to kind of separate those two.
Well, again, and that's why it's the battle of the experts, because as Frank mentioned, appraisals are not exact sciences. They are art forms. There's a blend between art and science.
Oh my gosh, Frank, you're an artist.
Value. It is
Picasso.
It is an opinion of value, and people differ in opinions, and the things that they consider are important. And you also have to look at it from the perspective of a jury. What is a jury going to say that 3-story mall is worth if it's,
So
if it's there and built.
It brings me to the question: what would you prefer, a jury or a judge?
And
you're working as the attorney, not the judge.
I'm going to go with the jury. You know, there was a study done that said that if you put 6 people in a room with varied backgrounds, that number, more times than any other number, comes out with the right answer. And that I read that shortly after I took the bench many years ago as a judge, and we have 6 panel jurors in county court at law. And that's the right number. When those 6 people get in the room and they've listened to the evidence and they go back and they start talking and going through the process, I have a lot of confidence that those 6 people can come up with the right answer.
That's a good thing. No, of course,
that is really good to know.
A very different perspective than a judge would do it because they're single-minded.
And there are 6 of us right here in the room right now. It means that we are the perfect amount of people that can make a decision, by the way.
We're coming kind of against that time again.
We are coming against that time.
I want to ask the good judge, what would you like to leave with the people?
Well, what would you like to have? What message would you like to leave the people with?
Yeah, the peoples.
Well, if you are facing a condemnation situation, I do think you should find yourself a lawyer, and I do think that it should be a lawyer that practices in the area and has a good command of that area of law, because it is a specialty. It is not something that you go to a lawyer that handles homeowner association cases because they're your regular lawyer and they handle your stuff and it's part of what's being taken. You need to go to a condemnation lawyer to handle a condemnation case.
And how do people get a hold of you?
I have my website is luccismithlaw.com, LUCCI Smithlaw.com, and my phone number at the office 832-494-1700.
And Frank, same question to you.
Question. What do you want people to know?
I think what I would point out is there was a study done, a famous study, a very simple study done either at Harvard or Yale, and it was about a coffee mug, and they produced coffee mugs and handed it out to the people in undergraduate class, and what they found out is those that got the coffee mugs, which was about half the class, thought the coffee mug was worth about $7. Those that didn't get it said they'd give $4 to it. And that study applies to cars, houses, businesses, and everything else. The gap between what you think it's worth when you own it and what somebody else on the street might be willing to pay is why the appraiser is there to close the gap.
How can we get a hold of you?
281-596-0066.
Great show as usual. One of the things we want to do is leave a great quote, and today is no different. Government has no other end but the preservation of property. That's from John Locke, by the way. John Locke, by the way. So until next, you quoted that in your brief, right? Time flies, you're having fun. We are done for this week. Until next week, we are out.
And you've been listening to the Real Estate Rat Pack. The question is, who's Frank, who's Sammy, who's Dean, and who's the other guy?
Chris is Frank, he's Dean, and I'm Sammy.
Yes, Dean. That's right. Yeah.
So tune in to the really big show every Saturday at 9 a.m. right here on 100.7 The Word, KKHT.